Hi, my name is Isabella Johnston, the Intern Whisperer, and today's tip of the week is about diversity and inclusion. The workforce is multi-generational and multi-dimensional. And what does that mean? All 5 generations are in the workplace. Multi-dimensional is represented by people of all types. Who are they? Individuals with disabilities, veterans, internationals, LGBTQs, and religious representation. The multi-generational is all 5 generations in the workplace. So it's important to remember that everyone wants to be seen, heard, accepted, and valued. Welcome to the Intern Whisperer, the show all about the future of work. And today's guest is Gonzalo Tundela. And I know him through the Transcend Network. He is one of the founders of Examined.io. You're going to get to learn all about that. He is brilliant. And he was like, we have all kinds of fun times from talking about Transcend Network. And we even have a book of quotes by him. So it's going to be super good. We're going to have fun. All right. So I kick off the show with 5 words that you say describe you. So what are your 5 words and why those 5 words?
Yeah, no, fair enough. So the first one I would say is that I tend to be a bit of a thought leader. I like to think about things differently. I like to challenge the way we do it. And I say the second word is that I'm a first principles thinker. And what that means is that I try to distill down the problems into its basic fundamental truths. And sometimes those truths lie in physics. Sometimes those truths lie in psychology. But you try to boil it down, the issue or the problem, into its first principles pieces, and then reason up from there, or then innovate from there. And third one I'd say is serial founder. So I've started a number of businesses. This is my first ed tech venture. So I'm learning all about the education landscape and world. Some people call me a change maker because I usually come in and try to change everything, look at things completely differently, and sort of try to tackle big problems. And then the last one is I'm a snowboarder. I love to snowboard. Spend a lot of my time in the backcountry, up the mountains in Whistler, around there in the BC coastal mountain range.
So your background is, tell us, our listeners don't know what it is. They can't see it, but we try to make our show so it's super friendly for people that are deaf, and even in the closed captions, they may not know where you live. So when you're saying it's Whistler in the backwoods, where are you? Because your background is amazing.
Yeah, well, this background on the Zoom thing is, it's not actually Whistler. This is Niagara Falls. So I'm a little bit of a digital nomad. My wife and I kind of picked up and left during the pandemic. Went to Spain, lived in Madrid for a bit, came back, and then lived in Whistler. And now we're living in the Niagara Falls region in Ontario, Canada.
Yeah, it looks.
So this is a beautiful kind of sunset photo of water flushing over the falls. I think that looks like the American side. There's an American side, a Canadian side of the falls, and yeah, it's kind of where I'm at these days.
So pretty. I'm inspired. Now I want to go to Canada and go check it out for sure. Okay, so tell our listeners, how did you get started? What did your career path look like to where you are now? Because as a problem solver, as somebody that likes to make change and looks at things differently, I am really looking forward to what that journey looks like.
Well, it's never a straightforward path, I'll tell you that much. So I don't know where to start in this. And it's kind of, maybe we'll go down the rabbit hole. Well, we'll say I kind of started my first unofficial business when I was in high school, where at the time, I'd been, like I said, I love snowboarding. So I used to compete. I knew a bunch of the reps. And at the end of the season, they would be, having a bunch of demo boards of next year's product. And I saw this opportunity where they weren't really selling them. And I said, well, hey, we could sell these to high school students, because no one cares about a slightly used board. And if it's next year, the cool factor goes way high. So I started, selling these boards on consignment. That led me into getting a deeper network, which then I became an extreme sports photographer. I actually shot the first cover of a magazine when I was 17 years old. It was a Snowboard Canada magazine. And then did that for a number of years, kind of worked with Nike, Atomic, K2, a lot of the major brands. Then there was the 2008, 2009 financial crisis came in, but just before that, all the trade shows and the industry started slowing down. And at the same time, digital prosumer cameras, like anyone could buy a digital SLR. And so the value of being a photographer was kind of going down. And I said, this is a great time to go to school. So my first university courses were micro and macroeconomics during the financial recession. Like it was fall 2008. And I went up to the professor at the time. He's the one who wrote the textbook. I was just blown away. I could go up to someone and ask them a question. And I said, if everyone's going to go a flight to safe haven currency whenever there's inflation and other issues, what do we do when the safe haven currency is the United States? That's the issue. Like the US dollar was serious potential problems. And said, well, you got to find other sort of non-traditional monetary sources. And so at that time, I bet on gold. I put everything I had, pretty much from a lot of my photography days, sold most of my equipment, and I bought junior mining stocks in about February, March of 2009. I just started throwing everything in. Just so happened to fully luck out at the bottom of that U curve. But I started becoming really enthralled about this whole investor relations game. And so I went to a lot of mining conferences, learned about the stock market, learned about these companies because they all just happened to be in Vancouver. And then I got into investor relations consulting for a while, ran that till about 2011, 2012, where I felt that we were at the peak of gold. And I sold out and I traveled the world for 18 months, went everywhere from Asia, South America, North America, Europe. It was a lot of fun. Came back and then co-founded a technology company with a friend of mine. He actually brought me in and said, hey, this is what we want to do. That company was called Vanderco Solutions. I ran that as the CEO for about 5 years. And that was acquired in 2019. Then I went to go help my wife's family business for about 18 months, kind of came in as a consultant, then kind of as chief operating officer, whipped things into the kind of new modern way of doing things with technology. And then we left for Spain during the pandemic. That's where my wife did her MBA. And that's where I found the problem of academic integrity, which is what we're working on today. So I know it was a bit of a rabbit hole,
no,
but
not at all.
It's never a straightforward path.
Not at all. I feel like you probably should have been training for the Olympics based on some of what you were telling, because that whole snowboarding thing and then
I realized, so I really liked freestyle snowboarding. Like that was my jam, but I'm a very tall person. I'm like 6'4". So I found that it was very difficult to start to keep up with the progression of where things were going. And truth be told, I wasn't that really good at park. I had a lot more fun in free riding, but I loved how the aesthetics of people making it look good. So I was competing younger, didn't do too well, so I decided to kind of pivot but stay in the industry, which is why I went to become a photographer.
Yeah, photography. If that was one of your pictures, that's really something. Also, is it stock or one of yours?
I found this one online. I found most of my stuff is guys jumping off of things and girls. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about the startup that you have now? And I think you have a co-founder, right?
Yeah. Well, Johnny and Brad are my co-founders. So Johnny, he's a serial founder as well. He started a company called bcjobs.ca with a guy named Ryan. And he also started a company that is now known as REW. I think it was at the time was called Property Insights. Can't remember. I'd have to double check. So he's our CTO. And then Brad Skousen is a PhD. He has been teaching online at IE University, teach their MBA program, or taught their MBA program, sorry. I believe he taught at Illinois, or he got his PhD there. I can't quite remember Brad's history, but this is his first company, especially in tech as well. I met when my wife and I were in Madrid. She was doing her MBA at IE, and we met and we just hit it off. And he saw the problem, and I saw the problem, and he decided let's go for it. Let's swing for the fences. So what Examined AI does is we help university instructors deliver exams to their students anywhere in the world with a high degree of privacy and integrity. So we think that online proctoring solutions have too many trade-offs, and they don't really address the root issues.
So that's very interesting. Well, we'll save that for the second half of the show.
Yeah.
Chat GPT, but yeah. So what are some of the, who's your client then? Is it schools, I would imagine?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I believe that our client is the student, right? So I think one of my spiky points of view is that the majority of the education sector is making technology for the wrong people. So they start making technology for administrators who then push it down to professors who then have no choice is the students have to use it. But when you look at the ratios, for every one administrator, there might be 20 professors, and for every one professor, there's 40 to 60 students. And so what starts to happen is technology gets really, really bad to use in universities, and students will hate it. And so we believe that our client is the student. So we focused a lot of effort at the beginning is like, what is a great student experience to take an assessment, to take an exam, to take a quiz, all that? How do we provide the best student experience? And then from there, we're now working on, well, how do we provide a great instructor experience? Mm-hmm. So we're currently at that stage in our product development where the instructors are really liking it. It's simple, but there's a lot more stuff we can do, a lot more features that would make their job significantly better. And then administration is a little bit of an afterthought, right? It's more like, yes, we know we need privacy security. Yes, we know we need VPATs for accessibility. Yes, we know we need LTI integration, but a lot of bulk edit, copy paste, stuff like that we can deal with after everyone's having a great assessment. And so that's kind of been our viewpoint.
Really interesting. How far are you in this process of rolling your product out?
Yeah, so we were founded in May of 2021. Yeah, I'm looking back. So we're coming up to the 2-year mark. And we're founded on the principle of ideation, iteration, get it out there, see what is going to happen. So we experiment quite a lot. So when we founded, we ran our first couple exams on this notion of what we call dynamic questions, which is where the assessment essentially is changed for each individual student. It kind of adapts to that particular student, whether it is a unique variation or whether they're going to be using ChatGPT, so on and so forth. So it allows for more of a dynamic environment. And so we built what I call rudimentary proof of concept within the first 2-3 weeks and had it live right there with professors in universities. And we gathered data. Did it actually solve the problem? And then we started iterating like, are we solving the issue without using a camera? Can we do it without invasive proctoring and privacy? And we iterated. So now, the first school year, we did about 4,000 assessments. And this school year, we're about halfway through. And I think we've delivered over 20,000 assessments. And we're probably on track to do, in this school year, we'll do over 50,000. In probably by the end of 2023 in the calendar year, we probably might do about 100,000 assessments.
Wow, that is quite a bit. And that sounds like really good feedback for obviously for your clients, the students, as well as schools, and administrators. We'll throw them all in there.
Yeah, the key to feedback, I think, is you really have to create feedback as a part of your process, as a part of your product. So what we do, it's very simple. I'm like, why didn't anyone do this before? Mm-hmm. Is at the end of every exam, at the end of every test, at the end of every quiz, when a student has completed their assessment, so to speak, we have a nice little page that just says straight up, like, how would you rate the software? And you'd be surprised. We get about 33% of students rating the software and giving us feedback after every exam. And you wonder, like, well, why? And it's because no one ever asked the student about their experience. Like, you have these universities charging lots of money for a degree, and the student is not, they say the student is the center of all of the experience, but they don't really design everything around it. They adopt the softwares that are available. To make the center really, truly the student, the center of the experience, you need to build feedback into their whole experiential process and not just, rate your professor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've been on that side of being the professor. So what I totally agree with you that the way that you're designing it should be for the student. To a certain extent, maybe the professor, because they're the person that has to interact with the student.
Oh, 100%. Again, for every one, 20, let's say 40 to 60 students, there's going to be at least one professor. And so there's going to be way more professors than administrators.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're going to be the ones that are also helping to answer questions if they have a student has a problem with it, whatever. So you almost make them your trainers to a certain extent.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is getting into this industry, I just didn't realize how low the bar was. I mean, we were seeing, quote from a client, our support has dropped 90% since we implemented your testing system. I'm like, what? What do you mean support? It's like, yeah, like with students asking professors for help, professors asking administrators for help, administrators and asking the vendors for help. I'm like, why? And it's people trying to do too much for too many devices. And I realize it's things like installing software on devices, trying to support all these different browsers instead of trying to be very simplified and streamlined with no installation. There's a lot to it, really, but I was actually quite surprised that professors just don't have a frictionless experience for doing something as routine as giving an exam.
That is very true. And as one person, I've taught at many colleges, and every school has different ways of delivering whatever the content is that I'm using. Blackboard was one of the things that I used to use, but then they'd go and try different ways of distributing their information. And I could tell you there was plenty of platform. I'm not going to go throw them all out there because that does not serve a good
Well, Canvas, I mean, from our side, Canvas is really taking off compared to Blackboard. Blackboard seems to be losing a bit of its market share.
Yeah.
I've heard good things about Brightspace and D2L kind of stuff, but I haven't really seen a lot of it yet. Like we haven't really worked too much and too deeply. I would say 80% of our clientele uses Canvas right now.
Very
Yeah,
good.
Moodle seems to be another one that people like.
Yeah, a lot of people that are instructional designers tell me about Moodle.
Yeah. What's interesting is I can see the notion people don't want to pay for an LMS, so then they use Moodle, but they end up paying in salaries for people to support and customize Moodle. So it's like you end up paying the same thing really as an institution, and it's just unfortunate when people go in not understanding that you do need support for that. You do need people to do customization, like Moodle administrators. Then it becomes a challenge for that task. Right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So before we leave this, I'm just curious, what is your growth plan? Because are you looking to stay just in the US or are you wanting to go global? I think global.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I believe that education is a global opportunity, is a global space. It shouldn't matter where I am to want to learn, right? Right. So that shouldn't matter. We should be able to be more accessible to more people. But there are massive challenges to doing so. I mean, the fact that GDPR privacy laws are very different than FIPA and FERPA privacy laws, yeah, we might assimilate, but it's very difficult to build and innovate as a small startup company when you have to architect systems for GDPR and you have to maintain differentiation of citizens. Like it's so that aside, coming into what our objectives are, we find that the United States tends to be the fastest moving of markets we've tested. For example, we've tested the United States, Canada, and Spain, and some South American countries. So some European countries as well. Europe tends to fall behind Canada, and Canada tends to fall behind the United States. So in terms of adoption, I think naturally we're going to see United States start, then move up to Canada, then over to Europe. And mostly because we don't actually have any expertise around Australia. Australia seems to be a pretty quick moving, probably the fastest in the world, but it's really far, both geographically, time zone differences, no network, that I wouldn't want to compete there yet. I'd like to establish a little bit of a flywheel cadence and rhythm in the United States first.
That's good. Well, we're going to go into a few other interesting questions because I always like our listeners to be able to get a better picture of who you are. Yeah. So what is a favorite quote that you live by?
Oh, I think there's so many, and it really comes down to the context of how we're talking and where we're at. But I think one that stands out and I say a lot is we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is a habit, not an act. Now, there's some, when you dig into this quote, you can find that, it's Aristotle, and someone says, no, it's this other person. And I think that attribution on this one is it's very old. It's someone, and it's kind of up in the air of who actually said it. But I do actually believe it. I think that excellence is a form of discipline and repeated process. and that's really just a habit. And so, I love books like Atomic Habits and in that kind of realm. And I also like the concept of, good technology forms habit, and you can use habit formation in a positive way. So, yeah.
Well, that's on point with one of the ways that people learn, right? Because it's through repetition that we learn.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be choosing to do something, you should always strive for excellence.
Well, I mean, here's one of the philosophical questions, and I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, but the question is learning by spaced repetition really learning pattern recognition? Because IQ tests are pretty much nothing more than pattern recognition.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, we can argue a bit of the depths of it, but I mean, that's pretty much the proxy for intelligence in our society is pattern recognition. And so spaced repetition allows you to gain knowledge or practice on a particular skill. And you have the, Bloom's 2 sigma problem, which is the deliberate practice plus one-on-one learning gets you 98% better than anyone else who just takes a class. So I think that, maybe it is all pushed down to learning. I don't know. I don't know enough yet. I'm still digging into the first principles to understand
That's
it all.
why you have a learning scientist on your team too.
Yeah, I mean, we learn, we work with a lot of people from different consultants, try to understand different places. But generally speaking, as we approach a problem, we try to distill the problem down to, again, that first principle, like a human psychology. And then what we try to do is review the academic resources on those particular things, and then the what are called leading experts in the field. So people who are on the leading experts, let's say learning scientists or not. And then we try to piece it all together to come up with a totally different, unique approach.
Mm-hmm. I
Yeah.
like that very much. What is the hardest lesson that you learned that was something that changed your life?
I have a few. I will do one that was very personal. So I got into photography because I loved taking photos. I loved creating that, or like that product, that beautiful image, right? And I did it for intrinsic motivational reasons. And as I became a professional photographer, it became a extrinsic motivator to get up and do work. And I killed my love for photography because of it. And so I think there's this, it's a form of psychology, cognitive dissonance, or somewhere in that realm, that area. And when you basically, the lesson was when you take someone who's intrinsically motivated to do something and you switch their motivation to extrinsic rewards, they lose all motivation over time.
Mm-hmm.
And I lost one of my loves and my passions from that. And so just learning that when someone's internally motivated to do something, like they're really intrinsically there, how you can harness and empower them with that without using external forces that could actually detract from it. And so they always say, do what you love. But I say there's a double-edged sword on that one.
Yeah, it is.
That was a tough lesson.
Yeah. Yeah, it always is. There's pros and cons, and it's a careful choice.
Yeah.
Habits, just like we were talking about before. What you love can become something that's not
Yeah.
always very good. All
Yeah,
right.
and I got another one that's an interesting business lesson. So a couple names and people will remain nameless, but I've got a friend who was wrongfully dismissed from a circle of billionaire circle, basically. And it was a wrongful dismissal, basically false accusations and everything. And he went to go defend himself, so to try and find a lawyer. And what he learned is once you reach a certain level, you actually start working with a bunch of different law firms, and it starts creating conflict checks so that you can never get a lawyer to defend yourself. And so I learned it the hard way in terms of like through being there, supporting and like learning, like, wow, this is actually tough. So my advice is don't mess around with billionaires. They're going to get what they want. It's a tough lesson. He actually learned it, but in the end, it all worked out. But wow, like it was a whole world of strategies and law that I'd never seen before. So,
what are you most grateful for?
I think I am most grateful for probably my parents' decision to leave Peru before they had me. So both my parents immigrated to Canada from Peru. And I was basically had my first birthday in Canada. I was actually born in the States, kind of on the way, so to speak. And that decision has given me every springboard of opportunity to basically being raised in a first world country where I can have access to good education, can have access to clean water, good healthcare, like simple basic necessities that I think everyone takes for granted. I think that decision is the thing I'm most grateful for. I think I would have a 180 totally different life if my parents hadn't made that decision.
That's really true. I was talking with somebody else and we were discussing how developing countries, previously called third world, but developing countries, they do not have the same, what we take for granted here in the United States. Every time I go to one of those places, I always come back and I go, gosh, we have so much here. So much. We really take so much for granted.
I mean, I think we take for like we often see these YouTube videos of people going like, oh yeah, I'm falsely arrested and here's all the things, your amendment rights and all this stuff that you could be doing, and ragging on the police officer for not getting it perfect. I sometimes see this and I go, guys, police officers are showing up. Police officers are there. I mean, I'm not saying they're perfect, but it's a lot better than some of the corruption you see in South America. It's a lot better than them not showing up. It's like there's some like we have. I mean, look, we probably shouldn't get into this topic. I'll probably spring some controversial thoughts, and I don't know enough to be an educated discussion about the challenges that we face in the United States. But in a third world country, the rules don't. There might be rules there, but they don't function, nor do they are actually upheld to any standard in the most side. And so we talk about corruption as a totally different world. Totally different. Just look at what's happening in Peru right now.
Yeah.
Right. Like right now there's protests in the streets and you go down. Why are we protesting? I don't know. We just want the president out. Like, okay. Like it's nuts.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a moment to acknowledge our sponsor, Transcend Network.
Transcend Network helps early-stage startup founders find product-market fit through weekly experiments, receive fundraising support, and build a global founder-investor network for EdTech and the future of work technologies. The Intern Whisperer is affiliated with Employers for Change, and we thank Transcend Network for being a sponsor of our show.
Okay, so now we're going back to the second half of our show where we're going to talk about the future of work and what does that look like. So ChatGPT. Okay, let's go. You posted a question on LinkedIn and I can't wait to hear what the response is for all of that, but go ahead and tell me.
Oh man.
Yeah. And we may have to take a step back because some of our listeners may not know what OpenAI is and ChatGPT is.
Yeah, let's lay some ground rules here. Let's lay some foundation work because I think that this is going to be a very deep subject of which I recommend that whoever's listening go down the rabbit hole, start to learn this because this is going to change a lot in our space. So firstly, let's talk about what is ChatGPT. ChatGPT is it is basically a chat interface with an artificial intelligence model. That artificial intelligence model has been trained, it's called a large language model, it's been trained on a very large set of data. And it's been kind of tuned on top of something called GPT. I believe it stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformers. We don't need to get into the details about large language models or GPTs or anything of that. What we need to talk about is a few fundamental pieces. So first off, the scale, right? People akin it to like, a significant portion of everything that's been ever written on the internet. Like that kind of, I mean, there's I think 100 and something billion parameters. Like there's quite a large amount of scale. So it's not that the model is intelligent and can reason. No, it's that it has looked at enough data that it can minimize the errors in the language it writes and it generates. That's the sort of dumb layman term to explain it. So why is ChatGPT important? Well, when you go in a chat interface, you can talk with it, ask it questions, ask it to explain things, and it will do a pretty good job of getting things right. I mean, you can take a MBA exam from Wharton on the subject of operations and logistics and just put the questions in, multiple choice, fill in the blank, whatever, and it will score between a B- and a B. And this paper just came out, week and a half, 2 weeks ago, about just that. So we're talking Wharton MBA level. It will generate original work. So you can say, compare and contrast. Let's just use something generically. Compare and contrast the way Marvel heroes and DC heroes are different, right? Something like that, right? The difference between Marvel and DC universe. And it will write a full cohesive, albeit short, maybe 2-page, maybe 1-page essay that has an introduction, a body, a conclusion, a thesis, the points, all generative. And we take that and you throw it through a third-party plagiarism system like Turnitin or anything like that. It will show up as 100% original work. And so my spiky point of view, the thing that I wrote in LinkedIn was, I believe the college essay is dead. Like it's dying. Yeah, like the way we have it today. And it had a very visceral reaction from everyone. I mean, I think I had well over 100,000 views. And I think about 150 people engaging the conversation and wanting to join a community about this topic, because the reality is what some of the things that are flawed in our system, again, going down to its first principles, is that we are measuring students' knowledge assessments. We're measuring them by the final output that they produce, right? And so when you have an AI assistant to generate original content that is going to be a B or B- MBA level work, all of a sudden people start freaking out, because now the essay, the final output of an essay, is it valid? Is it plagiarized? Is it actually original thought? And the answer is well, language is getting a calculator. That's the answer. And everyone needs to really think about those words. What I mean, language is getting a calculator. When we look back in history and we say, what happened when a calculator came out for math? Digital calculator or, rudimentary calculator. Well, the first reaction from our higher institutions was ban calculators in class. You're not allowed to use them. Why? Students are not going to think anymore. They need to be able to do the work, right? Then it became, and it was very much, even when I was in elementary school and high school, show your work, right? Well, today we take, a simple calculator like this Texas Instrument BA2 Plus, which is the business calculator, and we're teaching, all right, N stands for number of periods, I over Y stands for interest rates per year, present value. Here's how you calculate and put the numbers in to get to a net present value, or to get to your future value, or to, compute these fundamental financial calculations. And then the questions are, okay, here's company A, here's company B, do the work, use your calculator to help you. Now, which company is doing better? Which one do you invest in, right? So calculators have helped students and helped people lift to a higher level of thinking as a tool. And that took a really, really long time for higher ed to embrace it and work with it and adopt it, but it happened. And so what AI, specifically what generative AI is it is a calculator for language, is to help and assist students. So there are some startups out there that are basically like a word processor. Think of like Microsoft Office with AI built in. So think of like when you're typing, you can finish your sentence just like you would in Gmail, suggestions, well, like that on steroids. Or you can stop, you can do a command, and you can say, generate, I need to understand or explain, give me a paragraph on hydrodynamics. And so as I'm writing an essay or a paper, I may want to spend one paragraph or two explaining how hydrodynamics works, another paragraph explaining viscosity, and then the third paragraph I put together. And so do I really need to write a whole new thing on how hydrodynamics works? Do I really need to write a whole new thing on how viscosity works? No, I really don't. It's like work of common knowledge. It's like assumed common knowledge now in subject areas, right? What it really matters is how they work together and how I, extrapolate to the end goal I'm reaching. So ChatGPT is a calculator for language. And a lot of people are trying to say, well, we need to make a detection. We need to check if it's plagiarism. And to that, I say that's a futile effort. If it does not matter whether or not a student uses a calculator. And with language, I can just take it and paraphrase it or drop it into a Quillbot and have it all rewrite itself in different words. And you're not going to detect it. And so detection isn't the solution here. I think the solution is to change the way of which we are assessing students. Maybe instead of assessing the final output, we start assessing the work that went into it, or how they worked with these machines. Mm-hmm. Instead of assessing, essays, maybe it's more case scenarios, process, problems. Maybe it's, and actually we're doing this. So this is first time I'm publicly telling anyone. On February 15th, we'll be launching our first exam with ChatGPT in it to help students during their exam. And totally changing everything about this assumption of how we work with it. And the idea is that, well, when you use ChatGPT, we can weight your score accordingly. So instead of asking, what is the answer? And here's ChatGPT's example. It's like using ChatGPT changes the question to, are you correct or not? Or is the AI correct or not? And then the weighted amount is 50% guess instead of a 33% guess, and so on and so forth. And so we can start to do that so we still discriminate knowledge at scale. But now we're getting into too many details.
I like this so much because what you're proposing if we use the process, right, to be able to evaluate how do they think, that's honestly what I've done when I go and do a portfolio review for graphic design students, or if you're, whether you're a PhD or whatever, you still want to see, okay, so where was your brainstorming? I was an English teacher, so I'll use this as the example. We would say, okay, I want to see your brainstorming cluster, if that's what we were using. I want to see a draft of what you wrote. I want to see your sources that you pulled, and then that's fine. You can go use ChatGPT. It's totally good. But that is going to be one of your sources that you're using to build whatever.
Oh, 100%. I think most people are there. And if they're not, then they're just kind of behind the times. But most people are there already. It's like, look, you're allowed to use ChatGPT, use it as a source. Mm-hmm. And they're going to say, we're going to use the plagiarism detection, which like GPT-0 is the one right now that seems to be catching on, to detect whether or not it was AI generated. But again, it's a futile effort. It's going to be temporary stopgap because two things are going to happen. Two forces that you can't stop. First force is these models will get better. Will get better and better and better. So they will become more accurate and they'll become more diverse in tone, style, all that kind of stuff. So detection will be harder and harder and harder over time because it will just generate more of it. So you're not going to stop the billions and billions and billions of dollars that are going into AI. It's not going to happen. So you have to adapt and use it like a tool, assuming it's going to become near perfect.
Yeah, it will. It absolutely will.
Well, I mean, there are hints right now that we are going to start hitting that diminishing returns. Like OpenAI is the CEO, Sam Altman, I think last week had said, I think people might be disappointed by GPT-4, right? He's trying to set the tone. And I think it's rightfully so. I mean, the hype on this right now is so large. I mean, we're even talking about it. It's the hype on this is so large. It's in every news media, and a lot of people don't really get the subtle differences by saying it passed a Wharton exam versus like, no. Operations and logistics, quantitative-based thing is a very different problem than reasoning and philosophy. Like there's a lot of different things here, right? So there's some subtle differences, but I think that either way, we're going to see incremental improvements, maybe even step change improvements. But we're really going to see the step changes when we move away from transformers and into the next major AI models. But this is not here for us to talk about it here. Yeah.
One of the things that that this was my concern, and I know we were talking about it, but they took away cursive handwriting in the public schools. And so there's like 10 years, I don't think it's been there. And my concern with this type of technology is that people may not remember or know how to do research. So some of the discussion has been, well, do they really know how to research things now? Because we have Google. And then throwing another topic so we can just add on to it, because I said Google, is I've seen articles coming out, is this going to be the new Google?
Okay, so two different subjects there. Let's start with the first one. So I think there was an article that just came out in Higher Ed the last 2 days or 3 days that talked about how like ChatGPT and writing, like there used to be about 3 buckets, right? In high school, let's say. The first bucket is they're still struggling to master grammar.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're still not there yet, right? The second one is like, we've got grammar, I can write it, but they're nowhere near tone or style. And then the third bucket, they just get it, grammar, and they are starting to play with style, starting to play with tone and consistency throughout their paper. And those tend to be the A students in English, right? And then you have your middle ground, and then you have your struggling. What ChatGPT is bringing all the level 3 people, like the bottom of the buckets, up immediately. So that maybe what we're teaching instead of is grammar, we're actually teaching how to get to style, how to see and read and interpret and create your own tone and voice. That was what this article talked about. It just changes what we're saying, what we're solving for. And so as an example, in elementary school, by hand, I used to do long division. I have not done long division since elementary school. And I look back and I go, do I really need to know long division? No. However, there is so much good evidence that suggests the process of learning long division, the process of learning by hand mathematics. I don't know what the value of the process of learning by hand, cursive writing, but brain development in elementary school should be super scientific. Like we should be following and iterating on our papers all the time, right? But as we in high school, we need to start blending them into the real world. The pervasive topic that we see out of Silicon Valley these days is the universities will die. That 50% will be gone in 5 years. I think it's probably extreme, but there is a pervasive conversation going on, and it's because universities are not adapting quick enough to the changing needs of our workforce. Mm-hmm. And so if they're not adapting, then we got to start adapting at high school, right? Because there's going to be shifts over the next 5 to 10 years in the whole higher ed landscape. And hopefully they are able to adapt and move quickly and solve some of these structural problems. Because if they don't, then you have to look at the fundamentals, the first principles. People want the best product for the lowest price.
Yep.
And so if a university degree is going to cost over $100,000 and it's not the best product, and you can get an alternative skills-based courses, micro courses, get you right into a job in 4 to 6 weeks, 4 to 6 months, they're gonna do it, right? That's the thing.
Well, you raise a couple of other questions that are going on there. So the reason why I don't think that we go to college necessarily to get a degree, unless it's like being a lawyer, a doctor, a teacher, things that require years of experience, right? And lots of practice. What I think that most people go to college for, and it's never said this way, is you go to learn how to be socialized. And with large groups or with, working with teams, because usually you're not that well.
Maybe I'll disagree with that in a positive tone. Like I think that if we are to look at the last 20 years, generalizing, think people probably went to college because their parents told them they got to go.
Sure.
They wanted to get a better job.
Sure.
Could we put into a third one? They wanted to have fun and socialize, maybe. Sure. Let's just throw it in there.
Yeah.
Let's just throw it in there. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's a very expensive way to have fun. Like I tell you, you'll learn a lot when you travel alone. I've done it.
Yeah.
So let's think about this from a first principles. Okay, so the notion, let's start the first bucket is your parents pushing you to do so, right? Well, the generations have shifted. Now we have sort of like, the next generation, your millennials are having kids and so on and so forth. And so your landscape in 10 to 15 more years is going to be people leaving or entering into that potentially higher ed, post-secondary university type stuff. But the millennials' view on the value of a degree is very different than a boomer's view on the value of a degree. I read a stat, don't quote me, but something like, if you ask a boomer, is a university degree worth it? 85 something percent will say yes. You ask a millennial, it's like 15%. It's like polar opposites, right? So the question is it going to carry that same weight? Is that one area, parents pushing it on there, is that going to still be there? My argument is no, it's going away, right? So you have the second thing, which is to get a good job, right? Why is it to get a good job? Well, the university degree is a proxy for critical thinking and knowledge, right? The universities have this monopoly on credibility. When you walk away from Harvard with a piece of paper, people are like, oh, that person knows their stuff. They've went through it all. Realistically, what is Harvard really, really good at? Harvard is really, really good at admissions, filtering out to get the best people in. Mm-hmm. Is their education 10 times better than going to like Utah State? Is it really worth so much more money? I don't know. I've never gone there. But the prestige, the credibility, that piece of paper is worth more. So, but when you look at universities, when I talk about the currency of value being credibility, and that piece of paper is a proxy, it acts as a proxy for knowledge. Well, my question was, well, what happens when people start to question the integrity of that piece of paper? When they start to question, because, oh yeah, well, you're doing nothing in your assessments to filter out for ChatGPT, or nothing in your assessments to do for Chegg, Quiz Hero, Quizlet. Like, you have adapted nothing in your barometers of success. So you're pushing out people that maybe don't know the material and don't have the critical thinking skills. So then the question becomes, well, what's the difference between going and doing a MOOC or a small course in four months that has guaranteed placement at a company? Mm-hmm. Is it really worth hundreds of thousands, right?
No, that's where I'm going to say no. I think that you can now go to school, if you want to go to school, for 2 years and try and figure out what you're good at, if you still don't know that, and then work in those 2 years to figure out what industry you're going to be in and what you might want to do. But I feel like for schools to make that happen, you'd be surprised. I don't know about you, but most students that are the standard age of 20, 21, they don't know what industries are. So there's not even that discussion. They talk about a career path, but they're not even saying, okay, so this is what an industry is. And you can have a marketing degree and a career and go anywhere you like, whether it's games or if it's, I don't know, pick anything, Niagara Falls and how the water.
Yeah, but sometimes like too much choice is bad. I mean, there's a stat out there. I don't remember what it is, but basically there's a certain number of people that just follow in their parents' footsteps. They go into the same industry that their parents were in. I mean, you could probably think, if you just thought about 5 people in your circle and just be like, okay, well, how are they connected to their parents or the industry or something? Chances are, I'd say at least 1 or 2 of those people followed in their parents' footsteps or were adjacently close to it, right? I was like, well, I'm not quite a lawyer, but I work in legal services. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. Or, we're working in the mining industry. I mean, I so happen to be when I did that mining industry work, my mother was working in the mining industry, right? That was a huge lift in understanding and help, for sure, in understanding the industries that are out there. But it only hasn't come to the last, few years that I've learned of these industries that exist that I didn't even know existed. like supply chain sustainability compliance management consulting. I'm like, whoa, I've never seen that before. So I think that there is a thing about too much choice. But again, if I were to boil it down, if you have an individual, he is intrinsically motivated to learn something, they have that motivation, and they have that discipline, that deliberate practice, that we repeatedly do, excellence type piece. They're gonna get themselves into an industry. They're gonna make well into the six figures within 2, 3 to 5 years of that industry, because they're going to outgrit everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And I know one. I had a co-founder that was one, no university degree, made good money in technology, very good, and didn't follow his parents' footsteps. So much respect for that person, because he outgritted everyone else, right? He put in the time and he had the intrinsic motivation to do so. So I'm just saying that I think that this society will reward that more and more as we move forward in time.
Yeah, I agree with you. Okay, what is, so hard to believe it's been like an hour, but what is the best mentoring advice that you want to share with our listeners? Keep in mind they're eclectic for all industries and at least 3 generations.
Yeah, I think that this was a fascinating question that I saw, and it's the same advice. I'm just going to tell you how I got here. I saw it once where a friend was asked, he said, if you had to look back at yourself 10 years ago, in your 20s or whatever, in 10, 15 years ago, or if you look at yourself and you said, when you were 25, what advice would you give you? And there was a resounding thing that fits no matter how old you are, and it's really applicable to today's world. And it is take more action. So think about it less and just do it. In today's world, the things that are being rewarded are people who do, not people who get it right the first time. So there is this notion of, getting it out there and learning is better than not getting it out there and trying to get it perfect. Mm-hmm. So my mentoring advice to any listener out there is just take more action. If you were thinking, I've always wanted to start that side hustle or that business, just do it. Just get into it. Just put something out there. If it's to start a newsletter, get it out there. So I think maybe the Nike's got it. Just do it.
Yeah, I was going to say, you sound like Nike right now.
Yeah. Well, they're like, just do it. Get to the gym. What I'm talking about is just do it. Like that idea you had. There's so many tools available to start a business, to start new things, to try ideas, and don't worry that if you don't get your likes on Facebook, right? It's some will fail, some will succeed. Just take action.
Good stuff there. Yeah. How can people find you? What's your website? Best social channels to reach you?
Yeah, examined.io. That's EXAMIND.io. That's our website. And yeah, you can probably find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I think you're going to put some links, but that's the best place to find us. Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much. This has been just delightful. I'm so glad I got to have you on the show, and I look forward to having more conversations with the Transcend group.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this too. I know I was a bit probably rambly, but I like the subject. I like to switch a lot of subjects really quickly.
Yeah, you did great, and I know our listeners are going to love the show. So thank you.
Awesome. Take care.
Thank you to our video and editing sponsor, Cat5 Studios. We want to thank our production and editing editor, Josue Gonzalez, and our music by Sophie Lloyd. Visit Employers for Change at www.e4c.tech to learn how you can create real diversity and inclusion culture while scaling your people for the future. Thank you for supporting the Intern Whisperer by subscribing to us on Podbean, or you can find our video on our Employers for Change YouTube and Facebook channels, or you can stream from your favorite podcast channel.